Welcome to the 6-5 Summit. I'm Shelley Kramer, one of the founding partners here at Futurum Research, and on behalf of my team at Futurum and the team at Moor Insights and Strategy, welcome. We're so glad to have you. In this spotlight session, Moor Insights' Patrick Moorhead sits down with Teradata Chief Product Officer Hillary Ashton, and their conversation today revolves around the open data movement and the current market landscape. They also explore what we might see for the future of open data and how Teradata's strategy will play out. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let's go check it out.
Hillary, thank you so much for being part of this year's 6-5 Summit. Data is this track and a huge part of everything that we're seeing today. And you are from Teradata, who was doing big data before it was cool. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pat, thanks so much for having me. And big data is the new cool and the old cool. So I'm excited to be with you and talk a little bit about data.
Yeah, it's incredible. So, Hillary, there's been a lot of talk about this notion around open data, okay? And beyond the many layers of interpretations, the many different definitions, there's also a lot of hyperbole about what is open and what isn't. And, you have to expect something like that. But can you provide some perspective on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. There's a ton of hyperbole and sort of nuance around open data and what it really means. But let me start with how we at Teradata see it. We define open data as data that's not proprietary. It basically belongs to the users and it's based on open standards, but it is governed. It has to be compliant, it has to be ethical, and it has to be secure, especially in the world that we're living in today.
Right.
And when you work with data, these expectations are just table stakes. And so if I sort of build on that a little bit, sort of what is open data? Open data is about interoperability, and it's based on open standards so that organizations have the freedom to choose what formats they want to leverage, what environments they want to use it in, and based on the business needs that dictate how to use that data at any given time. And then I would just add to that companies really want to call the shots about how to use that data, how to integrate it, how to use it ethically, rather than being hamstrung by vendors who try to dictate their future and their technology over how to use it. Companies really should have 100% control over the ability to manage data and manage the costs of those data over time.
Yeah. So let me ask the contra question. Open data is not what?
Right. So what is open data is not, it's not a proprietary platform or data formats that result in data monopolies within a marketplace that are based on sort of a pay for play model. It really needs to be open. And so while some unicorns out there have recently enjoyed lofty valuations based on that strategy, this approach really leads to lock-ins. And when you're moving to the cloud, you don't want to lock in. It actually can even lead to a worse outcome like antitrust behaviors if we think about this over the long term. And I think we learned a lot about data and database lock-ins in the early 90s, and we're looking for something new and open. So it's also not a walled garden that undermines access or discourages experimentation or innovation. It shouldn't undermine collaboration with a closed system because we know that that's what kills innovation.
Yeah, is there anything around, let's say, PII data or anything related to that has to do with open data, or is that just something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, we strongly believe in protecting PII data. And while there's different formats and systems that should be open, companies really have the absolute legal need and right to hold that confidential data and use that for good following the PII guidelines that the governments have set out for us all.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been in this industry over 30 years. And I guess, I've been maturing in my way of looking at lock-ins in that every enterprise or every government organization will have some sort of North Star where it's like, okay, I have to make a commitment to this. And I think we've learned from the mainframe and the mini computer days of, there are certain things you don't want to get locked into because it really holds back innovations. By the way, nothing against mainframes. Ironically, there's more MIPS on mainframes this year than any other year in its history. But it's one of the biggest reasons that we saw mini computers and then client server relationships is that there was bigger innovation outside of that. And I think net, what you're saying is partially that open data is an answer to many of our problems, and dare I say, all of our problems. If I'm going to be, a little bit dramatic, but I like drama. But is this really the case, though? Like, in your opinion, when it comes to open data, what are the biggest opportunities as well as the challenges? And I do want you to address both the
Yeah.
opportunities and the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, open data sounds like a great big idea, and
Who
I
doesn't
believe it
who
is.
doesn't like open, right?
Open is great,
I
right?
like closed. I like
No,
proprietary.
closed and proprietary, run away, right? You shouldn't be doing that, especially when we're thinking about data and analytics and experimentation and innovation. And given data's historical ownership and access challenges, I think it's really easy to support efforts to broadly increase data accessibility. It just generally benefits society. It benefits all of us. So, for instance, leveraging school performance data like scores and socioeconomic status to better inform school funding and resources and even after school programs, or trying to understand where to put the best firefighting. I live in San Diego, right? Where should we put the best firefighting outfits based on the climate change that we're all seeing? But for those of us in the data business, we know that not all data should be treated the same. And as I mentioned before, we know that we have a special responsibility to protect data containing PII, or personally identifiable information. And we have to use that to balance our support for openness with respecting individual privacy and respecting rules and governance. But the open data movement really demands incredibly complex technology and societal changes, and this sort of magic wand scale transformations also introduce many challenges, especially when it comes to data responsibility and kind of walking that line between like cool and innovation and creepy. And we want to avoid creepy, obviously. Now, I think open data is responsible and cool when analytics can leverage accurate, broad based insights to really fuel positive societal changes, like some of the examples I just gave.
Yeah.
And yet it does become irresponsible and even creepy if anyone or everyone has access to PII data. It really would strip us of our personal, reasonable privacy. And obviously, it violates the law. So we need to make sure that when we think about open data and open data access, that we respect the PII data and stay away from that creepy concept. Now, I think data sharers also have to ensure data privacy. We have to understand lineage. Where did this data come from? Where did this analytic outcome come from? So that we can go back and make sure that we're doing things ethically, and also that we're providing good governance models and good governance frameworks so that we can make sure that we continue to provide ethical data outcomes, even in an open data environment.
Yeah, I have to ask, is part of your business model through monetization of that data at Teradata?
Yeah, at Teradata, our business model is absolutely not based on data monetization. We believe that consumers should have the right to participate or not in a market for their data. And we also believe that consumers should be in control and companies should compete for your data ethically. And then they should manage that data and govern that data. If we look to the future, we believe that business models should evolve not only to responsibly leveraging data, but also consider how consumers could be compensated for the use of their data, whether that's in the form of data dividends through incentive programs like loyalty programs, or through other kind of innovation models.
So, where does it start? I mean, does it start with self-monitoring? Does it start with government regulations? How does that start?
Yeah, I mean, I really think of the governance that has come in from the government and from watchdogs as really an accelerator to help businesses make smart decisions about how to use data. And in a lot of ways, I think the change that we've seen from government agencies, whether it's GDPR or PII protection, really allows us to enable our customers to leverage data ethically, but also to compete on data and analytics for the best outcomes and really balance that governance and restriction on data with the benefit that it can provide to all of us.
Yeah, I think what would help the audience to better understand this is for you to maybe talk about the market landscape of the open data movement. The technology, the philosophies. What are people are saying, and maybe the overall traction of the movement. So, essentially, what's the current state of play?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about before, open is absolutely the direction that I see the market moving in. From a technology perspective, the industry is moving to more open data and analytics, more usage of a wide range of tools, moving away from that closed and proprietary mindset, which really allows customers to future proof their data and analytics business. Now, it's important to remember that there's also several interpretations and flavors of open, and I think the most game changing version really requires more than just talking the talk. You
Yeah.
need to have a strong understanding of data architecture, of robust governance capabilities. You need to have deep data and analytics domain expertise about how you want to use that data. And of course, in today's world, tremendous scale because the volume of data is only increasing and the usage of AI and ML is massively increasing, as I know you know, Pat, massively too. And so that data scale, I think, is really important. And then the ability to integrate and optimize the data from a range of formats to realize the true value that that data can provide to you.
So, not all the players have the same philosophies, and I'm curious how you see the difference between maybe different private companies, public companies, and private data, how that plays out.
Yeah, you hit one of the areas I like to talk a lot about, especially when I'm chatting with some of our customers. Not all players share the same philosophies.
Yeah.
Some private companies are using the term open data with very closed intentions, aiming to open the formats of public and private data, but only as much as it really helps them manage their own proprietary environments. And some unicorns out there have done a good job of creating the perception that they're open. And then they actually stand to profit from that, despite their data sharing marketplaces being actually much more proprietary and essentially sort of a walled garden. It's open as long as you're in my garden, which is
Right.
really very different than true openness.
Yeah, I got to tell you, sharing some of my data, I'm an equal opportunity. I have Apple, I have Android, Windows, Mac OS, and I'm sure some other stuff that I would really like some easier ways to share capabilities and data on those platforms. And it's tough. If you're technologically competent, you can take care of all that stuff. And if you have the cloud, but it's harder than it needs to be. So I'm curious, what are you doing in, let's say, this specifically with open data, open analytics? You have something called Query Grid, which is your data fabric, which helps people to do that sharing. I use the smartphone example, but you do things that I think are a lot more important between enterprise customers and data centers.
I don't know if I ever want to give up my smartphone, but certainly I think Query Grid is a game changer for the market in
Yeah,
creating a true data fabric. Actually, I would even go so far as to call it a query fabric. And
yeah,
so historically, because of architectural constraints, because of proprietary approaches, everybody in the market said you have to move your data into a proprietary environment in order to get value out of it. But now with the cloud and the availability of a broad range of areas where you may want to keep your data, maybe it's cheaper to keep it over here. You were talking about mainframes. Maybe you don't want to move it off your mainframe because it would be like a ridiculous architectural exercise to do that for little or no value. Query Grid allows you to connect data wherever it is. And that is a huge difference when we compare ourselves to others in the market who are saying, oh, put it in here, put it in our closed and proprietary environment. We believe that you should be able to use data and not have to move it. And so with Query Grid, creating a query fabric, we allow you to do a remote push down query wherever the data is, whether it's in AWS Redshift, whether it's on BigQuery, whether it's in Teradata Vantage, or maybe it's running on Salesforce, and be able to leverage the insights from that data and pull it back to be able to do AI and ML at scale.
That sounds incredible. Does that include the edge too, by the way? And what I mean is not the edge like a smartphone, but like an edge server that's sitting in a restaurant or, that is creating a ton of data. Can I query on that too?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we support streaming, which is kind of what you're talking a little bit about there, the ability to take live streaming data, whether it's sitting, at a retail shop, or maybe it's sitting on a factory floor, it's streaming off of these manufacturing machines, and being able to detect something like maybe this machine needs to be taken out of service before it gets shut down and brings your factory line down. So being able to real-time ingest just the right data from that stream, and then run that query locally without having to do a lot of feeds and speeds back and forth across a large and potentially expensive and maybe bottlenecked throughput, depending on where that factory might be in the world.
Yeah, I love the maturation of not only the thinking, right? Because before you get to action, you have to recognize you have an issue, and not you meaning Teradata, but the industry having an issue. And I would say, gosh, 7 or 8 years ago, you had pressure from boards and executive staff that says everything you need to do needs to be in the public cloud. And then the industry sobered up about 4 years ago and realized, this hybrid thing is real. And regardless of where the data is, and oh, by the way, let's not forget about the edge, which is going to have the highest growth rate of any place out there. It's where the data is being created. We have to have some sort of mechanism, a fabric, a query fabric like Query Grid, to make that happen. So I'm glad we're no longer in denial. Now the industry just has to make it happen in mass.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, data has weight to it. We call it data gravity, right? So do you really want to move this massive chunk of data? You're not even sure how useful it is, and say, oh, move all of that over. It's going to take your IT team, 9 months to make that migration? Maybe there'll be something useful in it when you get there. What if you could use the data where it is, understand the value that it can create for your company, and then make some choices about any data movement that would be appropriate in order to suit your business needs?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the past, or I talked about the heritage of Teradata with big data. We talked about really what you can do with an open data approach today. My final question for you is what should we expect in terms of the future? I mean, it has evolved every year for probably the last decade, and it's going to keep evolving. What can we expect?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll start where we maybe I'll end where we started, right? So if you believe in open, which I haven't met anybody who does not believe in open and shared data, then we need to understand that walled gardens really kill innovation. It's simply the wrong approach for the future. And the technology has really blossomed in a way that allows us to be open in terms of how we think about data and analytics. The second thing I'll say is if it can't scale, you should look elsewhere. Teradata just announced 1,000 node test in AWS. It's the largest single system test in an AWS environment, which means you don't have to move data around. You just use it where it is. Think about that, 1,000 nodes. That's crazy. And this doesn't mean that our customers can't create their own and proprietary walled gardens if they want to, but we're here to be enablers of open data, respecting that data gravity that we talked about, leveraging a remote query grid capability well beyond what we know today and into some of those edge areas that you talked about, into remote data locations, and actually through the amount of scale that we're expecting AI and ML to really grow into over the next decade, I think that notion of open data combined with that scale is really critical to successfully competing in the market. And then finally, as we look to the future and consider other emerging trends like edge, like we talked about,
Right.
the walled garden platforms are already being predicted to be unable to keep pace with those industry challenges. We're already seeing that some of that is becoming cost prohibitive in the market that we have today. So we're really excited about the future here at Teradata. I think we're looking at huge opportunities to circumvent the lock-ins that some competitors are out there with, making data where we're focused is making data much more available and open in the ecosystem that we're all living in today.
Yeah, so Hillary, this is the best conversation I think I've ever had on the big picture of open data. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I'm certainly the audience is enjoying it right now. And I just want to thank you for coming on the 6.5 Summit 2022 data track. I mean, you are Teradata.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the summit, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks so much.